What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for League of Legends patch 11.20. I apologize for missing both the last rundown and the results video afterwards. Just ended up being just busy enough during that week that I never had a good time to record. And then, there were times where I had like an hour and a half available and could have done it, but ultimately, dropped the ball. It's okay. We're back for this one. It's a pretty small patch. This patch will not affect the World Championship. That has already happened, and we don't change patches in the middle of the tournament. So 11.20 is pretty small. It is somewhat solo queue focused. Again, being the fact that it literally cannot affect pro play. Obviously, the designers are spending a large percentage of their time doing the new season, some of which has been talked about online, more of which I know about because I work at Riot. I think new season's gonna be pretty cool. I'll probably keep saying that for each one of these videos, but we're gonna add more content to the preamble. I know they're still doing some mid scope work as well for more champions. I saw to the tune of things like I'm thinking Old Silas, recently Lilia. Who else got one not long ago? I'm trying to remember, but like things like that tended to work pretty well. Like Lilia, I think had stood out as a really good one. I know Lucian, I think is another one. Like, so that kind of work. I know there's another champion that just got like version 1 of trying, and so we'll see how that one goes. But yeah, some cool stuff in the future, of course. So it's not just going to be really tiny nothing patches. I think there are going to be some more mid-sized changes before the preseason update, which is usually 0.23. And anyway, let's get into it. So yeah, not a ton of changes here, right? But some interesting stuff nonetheless. All right, so Amumu. As it turns out, Amumu would have been one of the reshaped champions. So what's interesting is when I saw, it was either a Reddit thread about Amumu's overall support win rate or about the nerfs to Amumu in this patch. There was an upvoted comment thread on Reddit, which was like, when will Riot admit the Amumu changes were bad and revert them? And to me, that's, I get where it's coming from, but I think it's very dumb. So you need to be able to divorce yourself from the idea of their balance state right now with like how well designed the champion is, right? So I'll again just pick Yasuo as an example of a champion who has basically always been between like 48 and 51% win rate. Like his balance state at any given time has usually been fine. I'm sure there's been some higher outliers out there, right? But like he's almost always been like fine, and yet people have found him really fun, and they play him constantly, right? So that is to say, like Yasuo has been designed really well. He's very fun to play. His balance state has also been like reasonable, right? It's not like, oh, he's OP, who's getting played. He's fun, so he's getting played. Amumu is another situation where it's like, okay, let's think about the design ability of the champion versus the power level of the champion. It's like, okay, well, Amumu went from like a 5% win rate skew from like silver to diamond to a 3% win rate skew. Okay, let's be more accurate, it's more like that, from silver to diamond. So like the Amumu reshape like took out 40% of the elo skew, which is like, oh, that is a better design than the old Amumu. Like, double bandage toss is an interesting thing that not many other champions have. Amumu has a unique thing that he does. That's interesting. That's kind of compelling. Like, Amumu is an objectively more interesting champion, a more fun champion, a more balanceable champion. Like, he has been designed better. Now, his current balance state is that he's OP at support. That can be fixed, right? Riot can do stuff about that. And so, I know I'm spending a lot of time on, like, a random Reddit post, but, like, I would like if people downvoted dumb things more often, right? Like, it feels weird when clearly horrible takes have upvotes, because it's like, does no one think? Like, are you just like, yep, Amumu's an OP support, so the horrible changes? It's like, Riot can nerf things. Like, you know this, right? Anyway, Amumu is getting nerfed primarily because of support. He is, in fact, a relatively overpowered support pick. We've seen him at Worlds a couple of times here as well. Flashbang. Here we go. So, mana cost on the Q is going up. Now, my understanding is support Amumu maxes Q first. That is his highest win rate build and his most common build. For a jungle Amumu, I didn't specifically look, but when I looked like on the initial set of changes after a few days, Q max second or third was more likely to be the situation. So what that means is this damage change affects support Amumu, maximally at level 9, so pretty early on. 20 damage per Q is definitely not trivial. Being that Amumu is an engaged support, the damage output matters in this champion. And comparatively, jungle Amumu is not going to see any damage change until at least level 8, and maybe actually level 14 if it's actually maxed last. There is some reason to max it last. I don't remember which one's more common or which one's more powerful, but there's a choice there. And in fact, we might go to Q max last for Jungle Amumu because of this change. So a bit of damage down, again, to the tune of 11%, not trivial. The other change is the mana cost is going up. Now, I am not certain if this is going to affect support Amumu more or less than Jungle Amumu, because Jungle Amumu is going to spam Q. Right, so even though the damage is going to be the same, for the first rank of the ability, which is going to be the first 7 levels, which is going to be all the jungle clear that matters. So even though, Amumu jungle is not affected by the damage change, he is affected by the mana cost change because he's going to spam Q on cooldown. He's going to constantly Spider-Man through the jungle and get onto camps, and he's going to spend this mana. He's going to spend an extra 40 mana every cooldown forever, for like the entire jungle clear. And that can matter because keep in mind, right, you're going to have your W toggled on, you're spamming E on cooldown. If you ever don't have a blue buff, there is a chance this mana cost change matters. So there is a real chance that if Amumu gets counter jungled, because hey, in higher elo, people are better counter jungling, and Amumu is a pretty invadable champion, like there is a small chance that this kind of change actually has meaningful ramifications on jungle Amumu, especially if he gets his blue buff stolen, especially if he, can't cast his spells as often anymore. Also keep in mind the fact that Jungle Amumu, though he often does get a blue buff, and though all junglers get bonus mana regen while inside the jungle, he still does have to walk out to the jungle to go gank people, and then he's spending mana on his Qs, and there is a chance that this still affects Jungle Amumu in a somewhat meaningful way. That said, this probably affects support Amumu more. The only interesting part about this is, again, at rank 5 of the ability, the mana cost difference is only 20. So for an Amumu version who maxes Q first, which is support Amumu, he is getting a bit lesser of a nerf. Now, in general, I'm a fan of flat mana costs. I'm very slowly, kind of through my brain, tooling over like what I would consider a mana rework, and like I think end up with some decent gains as a result. I'm not sure it's worthwhile, but I'm still kind of going through it occasionally in my spare time. And part of that right now in my head is flat mana costs on virtually all abilities. I think it makes sense. If I ever make that video, I'll explain the logic for it. But I'm not certain. Anyway, either way, the point still stands that there's a reasonable situation or a reasonable idea that this going 60-80 would have been a better change for nerfing support Amumu, because support Amumu maxes the Q much sooner. But this should still nerf support more than jungle. But even if support didn't exist, this would clearly nerf jungle Amumu, right? It is nothing but nerfs. Jungle Amumu is clearly weaker after this patch. Like, that is just true, objectively. I think this should probably nerf support more. All right, long time on that one. Let's move on to the next one. Darius. So Darius is an interesting spot where apparently 1/4 of all Darii are maxing W second. Which is wrong, by the way, because the apprehend cooldown matters a lot. Apprehend percent armor pen matters on rank up there as well. Crippling Strike has, I want to say, like practically flat damage on it. Like at this point, I'm not even sure what Crippling Strike's rank up even gives you. Maybe 5% total AD. There's not a lot here, right? This barely has a rank up at this point, which is fine. But they're basically saying, hey, look, now that W has been flattened at max rank, please stop putting points on W. So not only is he obviously objectively more powerful in the good builds, where you're maxing E because you have 2 seconds off your W cooldown for the first, million levels of the game, but we can also get people to now go in max E, and that will also raise his win rate. So curious to see if that happens. If people actually move around, but yeah, a lot of Dariuses are not intelligent about their skill orders. That is doing something to kind of depress his win rate, but I trust that Riot did their due diligence, and there is in fact a reason to buff this champion. So okay, great. Next up is Elise. Elise is getting 21 base health and 0.65 armor growth. Yeah, she is a reasonably low win rate. So here is her health before and after. Obviously, a flat 21 health is going to fall off over the course of time, but scales up to what is a pretty reasonable, like pretty fairly high amount of health. Then we look at her next version. I'll be honest, I would have rather seen Elise gain a lot more base armor. So I would have actually liked to see maybe like 30 plus 0.35. And yeah, that wouldn't have been probably as much here because, hey, what's 3 and 2, but not a ton. She'd be like maybe 90 armor at level 18. But what I have anecdotally seen about jungle Elise is that the good Elises are good at using the spiderlings to tank and absorb all the damage, and the bad Elises don't do that very well, and she takes more damage. And so to me, giving her better, like, literally jungle tank ability in the early game is going to help bad Elise players do better. And thing is, like, I'll take a 1% credit for getting this wrong, because I saw the change list on like within 5 hours of it being posted for like internal like checklisting, like, hey, does this make sense to everyone? Okay, cool. And I didn't think of it in time. Like, I didn't think of like, hey, by the way, what if we chose to give her base armor, because I feel like bad Elise players are bad at, like, maybe she doesn't have any low skew and I'm wrong about this, but like it feels like she does, right? Because I feel like you see her in diamond but like never in gold. And anyway, yeah, I think Elise probably could use higher base armor. Whatever, it's a really minor thing, but would probably help with elo skew very, very slightly, because she's better at her first few jungle camps. And yeah, 95 armor at level 18 is obviously quite high. This is going to give her much more late game durability. This is kind of clearly to some degree the goal, that Elise at some point needs to turn into a bruiser by end game, which, I mean, yeah, kind of lines up with how her kit actually functions. She's kind of a light fighter. She's sort of Fiora-esque in her, vaguely her combat pattern and combat duration. She's like vaguely Fiora, which means, yeah, you kind of need something durable at some point in time. Now, Fiora can buy a Sterix Gauge, and Elise can... I mean, you can buy Zonius, right? And Zonius is a good item, obviously. But, like, yeah, wouldn't be a problem if her stats actually allowed her to frontline late game. That actually kind of feels reasonable. Okay, so seems like reasonable changes to Elise. Pretty small buffs there. Okay, great. Next up is Hecarim, one of the 3 champions I jungle this season. And pretty big buffs. So 4 seconds off Spirit of Dread's cooldown. Much like Darius, you max this one last. By flattening the cooldown on this, you further incentivize not putting points into it. So, okay, sure, it's always Q into E max Hecarim. No surprises there. Also, 30 flat healing increase versus minions and monsters. Knowing full well, by the way, that this is a very, very large laning Hecarim buff. So keep in mind when you are jungling. So my experience jungling Hecarim, by the way, is that you are more often mana constrained and clear speed constrained than health constrained. Like, yes, you can be invaded and killed because, your early game clear is actually pretty trash for like the first very, very few levels. But I haven't ever felt very health taxed playing Hecarim. But that said, getting 30 extra health per camp, about 4 times in a jungle clear, because I'm probably getting it on... I'm getting it 4 or 5 times in my first jungle clear. Like, that is going to matter. It's going to add up to 100 something health. I'm going to come out a little bit healthier. I'm probably never not smiting another camp if I'm trying to get level 4 for a Scuttle Crab in time, but maybe it's a 5 camp clear because that Scuttle keeps Smite up, and you're healthy as a result because you got to use W for 30 health, an extra 4 times, and now you're, up, virtually a Smite in health. So, like, that can make sense. Ultimately, obviously, W, again, is a 1-point wonder. The damage output it actually deals is not that high, but it has some pretty decent sort of self-lifesteal attached to it. For PvP combat, again, you're going to heal up off the jungle camps quite a bit more. You're going to feel this a fair bit. So yeah, I mean, clearly a buff. This is going to help us early clearing a little bit, just because, again, you're going to get another W sooner and then another W sooner, and that can sometimes help you push through the camps. I'm not expecting a 6 camp 315 leash list by any regards, but is going to move the needle a little bit, and that's nice. Hecarim, from what I can tell, though, by the way, is actually a pretty decent jungler. Oddly enough, if you go Trinity Force. So I looked at as much data as I could, and Trinity Force Hecarim seems to be far higher win rate than Divine Sunderer Hecarim. The idea being, essentially, like, look, you're picking Hecarim to assassinate someone, right? You're going in to go dive to the backline and fear the misfortune and charge into her and spam Qs and deal damage, and Trinity Force is just more damage there. Keep in mind, the way that healing works for the champion is, okay, you can buy Divine Thunder, and that means that when you hit with a Sheen, you like heal for some percent of the damage dealt. Okay, great. But Hecarim already drain tanks with his W, which means, like, you're kind of getting comparatively less from Divine Thunder healing, because you already have sustain. You're already healing. You already have the W. You're not uniquely getting sustain. You're just getting a bit more, which isn't that useful in a lot of cases, whereas getting a bit more damage means you might finish the kill. Keep in mind the fact that Trinity Force's Mythic passive has ability haste, which is massively important on his Q and his R, and move speed, which is just important, period. So just by the way, and then he actually uses attack speed, because he actually auto-attacks quite a bit, because he runs fast and keeps up with his targets. So I want to say very clearly that Trinity Force is a much better mythic option than Divine Sunderer. People are wrong for going Sunder Hecarim. They should be going Triforce Hecarim. It is a better build. You will have a better time. Play it. It's actually quite strong, especially with these buffs. Triforce Hecarim should be in a very good spot. Next up is Irelia. I'm not putting anything in the sheet down for this one, but another small nerf to Irelia. This is Irelia scaling off of gold. This should actually tap down high elo slightly, because in general, high elo players gain gold better than lower elo players, so that tends to be the skew. So yeah, nerfing her late game, especially her gold scaling, the bonus AD ratio at max stacks is going down a little bit. So instead of doing 1.3 extra total AD, it's 1.2 extra total, or well, not exactly true, but yeah, it's a nerf of about 1/13 to her late game auto attack damage. It's going to be roughly accurate, actually. Okay, great. Okay, less than that, but still. Anyway, next up is Jarvan. Jarvan is losing basically one of the buffs he got in the previous patch. Obviously, he's been really taking over, has been an outstandingly strong jungler. I played against him once or twice with the new Yomu's first build. It's pretty good. Yeah, so partially reverting the buffs. Yes, Jarvan's in a very good spot now. He was one of the champions I was thinking of when I was like, but what about Stridebreaker champions? When Stridebreaker got buffed and Jarvan was like the front and center. Turns out you just go Gardner because the items are overpowered, but it's still... You can kind of make a choice between the two. But yeah, Jarvan's just like a very, very good, frontline fighty guy. Okay, lower the damage back down. A bit too much, sure, okay. Yeah, I mean, he's doing really, 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 really well. So, okay, sure. Next up is Shen. Shen's getting 10 off the shield yet again. This goes back and forth quite a bit. This has been his buff and nerf, I think, several times now. But yeah, Shen's a bit OP. So here's the data table. It's not anything really eye-shattering. I don't know what eye-shattering is, but whatever. Don't think about it too hard. Yeah, I mean, very meaningful, though, for his early trading, right? You're going to take 10 more damage on every trade in most cases. That's meaningful. So, yep, a bit too strong for solo queue. Okay, down he goes. Fine. Next up is Singed. Singed gained a lot from his Poison Trail applies Grievous Wounds buff, so taking him down a very little bit. It's not a ton. This is actually surprisingly not as big as it might look like on paper, but the E damage is down 0 to 20. Keep in mind there's a % health ratio, a % health damage on the E, so this is the entire base damage. And the damage ratio is going down pretty massively, actually, by 15.15, which is actually pretty meaningful. So let's take a look at it and see what's going on. Base damage using a fairly normal target dummy is here. Worth noting that indeed targeting champion with over 2,000 health only has 260 on the base damage. And it was only 280 pre-patch, so it's not like it was even that high before. This is one thing to point out, right? And it's also kind of why like maxing E isn't all that good, and why it's not even that big of a power spike. Because how many abilities do you know that are just single target point and clicks that only do like 235 and now 216 damage? Like it's just not that high, right? Fling is just like actually not that painful. So kind of thought that was worth looking at. 1 second, I'm going to do some math. And on your screen has appeared, if I've done my math correctly, the pseudo AP ratio of Singed E. So let's spot check this, right? If it's a 0.6 AP ratio, 0.6 times that number is indeed the damage it deals. Yes, we got it right. So they have actually nerfed Fling's AP ratio into complete garbage status. Now, this is, again, something I can, talk about really quickly. Singed's Q has an incredibly generous, very aggressive AP ratio. And so I bring that up because the idea of thinking about AP ratio consistency. So I've said a couple times in these patch rundowns, I like to see AP ratios that, by max rank for regular abilities, not ultimates because they're special, you're looking between 300 and 400, like around 350, 330, usually, for the AP required to double the damage of the ability. That, to me, is what makes sense for damage. The reason why is kind of twofold. One, it ensures that your damage can remain relevant as the game scales on, because normally AP ratios are for flat damage abilities, which means they okay, Veigar Q. Now Veigar's a weird example because he stacks AP, but imagine he didn't. Okay, let's look at Annie, right? Annie just has flat damage on all her abilities. And so she needs AP ratios for those damages to matter. As champions gain health and level up, they gain MR and level up, they gain health and MR on buying items as well, and she has to keep up. Like her output is still damage, her role is still damage, so AP ratios allow that role to still happen, right? She can still be successful as that instead of just a stun bot, like support Annie of old. And her damage was irrelevant for the most part, at least in the late game. So this gets softened somewhat when you have a percent health ratio, because a percent health ratio gets rid of one of those requirements, right? It already scales as they buy health, right? So imagine, let's take, I think we can do this one right. Let's see. So let's imagine, oh, okay, I see, right, it's over here. So let's imagine, right, our target champion, had 4,000 health instead, right? Oh, the damage is now 410, right? So this is what you get by having a health ratio is, well, I go from 260 to 410, aka plus what, 150 damage, if my math is right, when I'm hitting Shogath versus hitting Ashe, or just any late game melee champion, because Darius bought a Gore Drinker and Irelia bought a Sterix Gauge and, whatever, right? So you get to cover one of those bases by default, right? Like, I mean, think about it. We'll go back to this one again. Just by hitting Shogath, my base damage here is like about as high as the old version's ability against a squishy with a good AP ratio attached, with ability power attached. So the point being, again, to circle back to it, the need for an aggressive AP ratio is clamped down when you have percent health scaling, because it will natively scale with the game. So, okay, that's version 1. And so it's why a lot of times, if any of your abilities ever have a percent health ratio on it, they're often going to not have as aggressive of an AP ratio. So that makes sense. The other part, though, is you want to be able to bribe champions into buying ability power. So we'll go back to the Annie example, and it doesn't have much of a reason to build tank. With an exception, support Annie is a stun bot. Her damage is never going to be relevant. So like back in the day when support Annie was a thing, right, she'd just buy all the movement speed items, right? She'd buy the Shrelias or the upgraded coin or whatever it was, and she'd just get into range. She'd get like Twin Shadows, I think, as well. And it was like, look, I'm just going to buy the move speed things, and I'm going to get my stuns off, because her AP ratios weren't high enough, or her damages weren't high enough, or the game states didn't really allow her to build ability power. And to some degree, you could say, well, her ratios weren't high enough, and that might have actually been true. But in general, right, she didn't have enough of a reason to get more damage. She just wanted to be, more able to land stuns. Sure, okay, makes sense. But if you have a champion like Singed or Echo or Cho'Gath or whatever, where it's like, hey, you're a frontline champion, but, your role is sometimes damage. We would like you to be able to build ability power somehow, we'd like you to be able to build ability power sometimes. Well, you need an aggressive enough ratio that it's worth building Void Staff. Void Staff's a weird option. A Death Cap, a Cosmic Drive, a Rylaze, a Demonic Embrace, like that kind of stuff. You need to be willing to build ability power instead of just a Randuin's Omen or a Frozen Heart or an Abyssal Mask, right? Like, if your AP ratios aren't good enough on Singed or Cho'Gath or whatever, there's no reason to do anything but build tank. If any of you remember back when Tank Echo was the meta champion, and all you built every game was, I think it was like Iceborne Gauntlet Abyssal Mask every game, it's because his AP ratios weren't good enough for him to build not tank. It's like, well, I frontline, I have CC, I can kind of stun sometimes, like, I'll just build tank because I can do all of my kit's things. Why build a Lichbane when I can build a Randuin's? And it's like, oh, well, let's just give you more aggressive AP ratios and maybe lower your base damage a little bit. Okay, well, now if you build a Randuin's, you just don't do any damage. But if you build Lichbane, you do a lot of damage. So, like, come build AP with us, right? And so if you want your melee champions to actually build interesting, compelling offensive items and have a riskier playstyle, you need to give them reasonably aggressive AP ratios, right? Because compared to someone like Syndra or Orianna, why would they ever build tank? They're not even getting hit by anything. Like, they're just gonna free fire. Of course they're gonna build ratios. You don't have to bribe them much. Obviously they need to scale. Like their late game matters. People won't pick champions that have no scaling at all, but you kind of comparatively need to bribe AP champions less. Like if Riot needed to nerf Syndra, they could, and for some reason they decided, oh, actually, we need to nerf Syndra's AP ratios. They could do that, and Syndra would still build ability power, because what else is she going to build? She's not going to go AD. She's not going to go tank, right? She's just going to be a mage. She's going to build ability power. But if Riot nerfs Echo's ability power ratios, he might just build tank, and then tank Echo's back, and it's like, oh, whoops. And so again, when champions have competing ideas here, they've got to pick which way to go, right? So, Kai'Sa's AP ratios or Ezreal's AP ratios, right? Like, there is tension in, do I build AD, do I build on hit, do I build AP, you know, whatever, right? So ratios, so to kind of final up on this point, essentially, if Riot wants these champions to build this kind of item, right, to build AP on Singed, for example, then he needs to have aggressive enough AP ratios where it's potentially reasonable to build AP instead of tank. So to circle back, Poison Trail's AP ratio is very, 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 very aggressive. It's really, really absurd. It's really, 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 really high. So that's probably going to, in almost all cases, carry it. And I think it's reasonable for Riot to say, hey, we're kind of intentionally going to say that as you build ability power, your Poison Trail is like where your damage comes into. Because that is like the iconic thing about Singed. Like, Singed is definitely like the Poison Trail champion more than the I one-shot you with Fling champion. So of the places that nerf base damage, of the places that nerf an AP ratio, it can make sense on Fling. I'm not sure Singed needed an AP ratio nerf on Fling. I don't really know. But I do know that because his Q ratio is very high, he's going to build AP. And so this is going to affect Fling further. So through that lens, it does make sense. So even though this ratio is really, really, really bad, keep in mind that on one half, there's a percent health ratio. So it's going to scale with champions anyway. It's going to scale with the game anyway. As I just get spammed with phone calls, I'll just put it on silent. Okay, so yes, the Fling scales with champion targets. The AP ratio is worthwhile because of the Q. And anyway, as a quick look down on the rest of the numbers here, so the base damage if you don't build an AP is down a little bit. If you do build AP, it's down quite a lot more on Fling. Right, level 13 decent ability power. This is going to be 200 ability power roughly. 330 damage on the E is not terribly high, right? So on an example target at level 13 with some decent ability power into the build, it's some, right? It's not a lot. Fling is definitely not a huge source of damage. I mean, again, the base damage is down to 260 against a 2100 health target. With 270 ability power at level 18, it's still only 421. It's not that high. Yeah, Fling is just like not that deadly unless you're flinging tanks. Just the way it is. Okay. Next up is Taliyah. Taliyah doing a little bit too strong, so it is a jungle-focused Taliyah nerf. Obviously, Riot seems to be happy with the changes to the Q to make it more easily to throw rocks. The buffs to the fact that if you throw another Q, it's on a shorter cooldown. It's easier to get a 5-stat Q out. Those are going to do some things to buff jungle Taliyah, obviously to a certain degree. So yeah, okay, they're happy with how Taliyah is going in mid. A little bit too strong in jungle. Okay, small damage going down. And here is Taliyah's maximum monster damage with the Q. It's actually like 95.1%. 0.2%, okay. So it's down 4.8% damage. Okay, whatever. It's going to matter some, right? It is less than auto attack in all cases in terms of like amount of damage lost. So again, not absolutely huge, but the ratio is also down by the same amount. So, as that scales up, as you get more ability power, that's going to go down. And again, this is monster damage only. It is just clear speed, and it's clear speed being tapped down pretty delicately. Will this maybe make her take one extra auto attack to kill a blue buff or a Gromp or the Big Wolf or whatever? Yeah, it might. This can slow down her jungle clear. In fact, it should at some point slow down her jungle clear. She's going to at some point be slower by a full second and change because she has to throw one more auto attack out. That has some impact. It'll matter a little bit. It's there. Next up is Udyr. Udyr is getting a revert on the Phoenix stance base damage. So 50 to 275 goes back to 60 to 310. If I have my math, or if I have my recollection correctly, the 310 comes in at level 16. So this is 1 through 9 and then at 16. So here is Phoenix damage. Great, it's up. It's not up by quite as much, and then, it's up 13%. So this is obviously decent damage. Obviously, for a large portion of the game, you're looking at this, which is, again, still pretty meaningful. Worth noting that this does not affect the aura damage. I did not put that number in here. This is just I'm hitting you with the fire thing. I didn't do the damage over 3 or 4 auto attacks, whatever. It's not super required, but here is the damage of the actual Phoenix Scout itself, up 10 to 30 for most of the game. And then if you get to really, really late game, it's up by 35. Okay, great. Now, as before, I wanted to do the math. Hey, how good is the AP ratio? So once again, I want to point out the fact that if you want your AP ratio to matter, you have to bribe a champion away from what is already their most, their strongest or most compelling build, most obvious build. I actually believe Phoenix Dance could use a bigger AP ratio buff. So 325 is, to my recollection, slightly aggressive for an AP ratio. It's pretty good. It's above the median AP to double number, But we're talking about Udyr here. This man has to walk and auto attack at you. Like, he can get bear stance movement speed, then stun, then press R, and then auto attack you once. But it's also like his only AP ratio in the entire kit. I think W's shield might have an AP ratio. Okay, so there's a second AP ratio, I guess, to be valid. I am pretty sure that one has one. But Q doesn't, E doesn't. You've got one, right? And yeah, it hits pretty frequently. But, you know, Syndra has like I want to say like 2.5 total AP ratio on her pressing all of her buttons. Udyr has 1.3 at best. Who's going to build AP on this champion, right? Now, I'm not saying it has to be like a 1.5 ratio. Like, that's going to be really degenerate really fast because you literally just do 800 damage on one auto attack without a Lichbane, just like a couple of AP items. It's like, okay, yeah, that's probably not okay. So I'm not saying this has to be buffed incredibly, but I am saying that this being maybe 300 AP to buff instead of 325 would probably line up better with what Udyr would kind of need to make this build make sense. And what's kind of fun about the 300 AP to double idea is it doesn't really have to care about the base damage of the ability. Like, imagine he instead has something like Defile, like he has Karthus E. You know, or he has Cassiopeia Q, but it's melee range, or he has, you know, like, in any of those cases, if you're trying to convince Udyr to build that way, you kind of need the ability power ratio to be aggressive. So I think even though the base damage got a bit higher, the AP ratio itself was still pretty good. It probably doesn't do enough to make Udyr successful as an AP champion because he just has too many other competing builds, and the ratio isn't so aggressive that he's going to forsake his, you know, more obvious build. That's all. All right, so next up we have Imperial Mandate getting a buff. So this is buffed by a flat 25%. 36 becomes 45 and 60 becomes 75. Imperial Mandate is one of those few items that still scales from level 1. I think this is a mistake. I think every item, every completed item, Legendary Plus, should scale from either 9 plus or 10 plus. I've talked about it enough, I think, on the rundowns, but essentially I think it makes it a much more sort of readable and understandable item because the numbers actually exist. So what really happens is, you know, 47 becomes 59. Scaling to 60 becomes 75, which is like, oh, this item doesn't actually scale very hard, right? When you see 36 becomes 60, or, you know, 45 becomes 75, you're like, oh, wow, this item actually scales, like, it almost doubles the damage. Okay, cool. It's like, no, actually, in every real application, it goes up by a quarter, right? It goes from 60 to 75. It doesn't really go up by that much. Like, this is the actual scaling of the item in any realistic scenario, basically. Like, oh, okay, it's fine. And it's not that it's worse, right? Because, you know, it does more than these numbers, right? These numbers never even happen. It does these numbers. It does the bigger numbers. Like by that existing, it's actually better than the tooltip looks, which, okay, like on the one hand, that's kind of neat, right? It's better than the tooltip looks, which I think is a mistake of a tooltip, by the way. Again, I had to just scale at 9 plus because of that reason. But also, like, I don't know, it also doesn't actually scale, right? It is an item that spikes early when you buy it and then barely scales from that point on, which, I don't know, to me feels weird. Right? Because this item tells you it scales, but it doesn't, because it doesn't actually scale because the item numbers barely change. That's all, right? It allows you to be more obvious about what you intend with the item because you have to, because then you're honest with yourself and everyone else about what the numbers actually are. That's part of it. Anyway, the Imperial Mandate itself does more damage on actual strike. So instead of going doing like 3.5x, it's just doing exactly 3x or whatever. Because it's 25% higher, so okay. So it's just exactly 7% more damage. You know, you hit them for a bit more damage to the proc, you know, to the tune of 12 to 15, okay? Or like just on the initial hit, like I hit you, okay, 12 to 15 more damage. Great, you know, non-trivial, that matters, absolutely. And then, you know, my ally blows up the mark, we do the rest of the damage, and it's of course still up by, you know, 12 to 15, because of course it is. The second half of the damage didn't change any, right? Second half of the damage is identical, as far as I can tell. And then what's nice is they finally fixed this bug. I have a friend who plays an Nami. He gets a lot of kill steals because, yep, the Mandate mark will pop and just kind of always attribute it to the Nami. It seems to be really common. It just keeps happening. So that's good. This is actually a buff to Nami by a lot. So Nami's going to be in a really good spot post-match, by the way. Like, that champ's going to be real strong by not kill stealing the carries, and the damage of the item that she actually buys is getting a lot better. So if you want some freelo, and the patch's already live, by the way, because I'm late in this rundown by a day, play Nami. And then finally, we have a jungle change, which is Smite is doing 5% less max health healing. As compensation, Gromp and Big Krug deal 4 less damage. So the reason is basically they're kind of dancing around it slightly. Essentially, what they're looking for, as far as I can tell, and maybe I'm wrong, right? So, grain of salt, is the optimization that, okay, we're fighting in the jungle. I've got red smite, you've got blue smite. It's better for us both to smite the jungle camp to heal than smite each other. That PvE smiting is the optimization of smite. And that, increasingly happens as time goes on. I obviously understand if it's level 7 and you haven't gotten upgraded smite yet, all you can do is smite a jungle camp and get a heal. Yeah, sure, of course, right? That makes sense. But turns out 50% plus 50 is a really, 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 really big heal. And that's just better than red smiting someone. So you just smite the blue buff no matter what. And yeah, it is skillful to optimize and pick a big smite, but also it is kind of whack that you got a PvP smite and it's but it's wrong. You got the PvP smite, but don't though. But actually smite that Gromp that's not even aggroed yet. So I actually, I respect that logic. I think that's fine. This, I think, generally helps aggressive junglers very, very slightly because now your opponent, Hecarim or whatever, can't just smite the red and run away as easily because the Hecarim's getting 50 less health from the smite. And that matters a little bit here. So here's the healing. Down by about 30 in the early game, down by up to 100 in the late game. Again, if you have 2,000 health, that is 100 HP on 5% for the smite. So, yep, the healing, because it has a 50 flat up front, that's where the math goes, right? That's how we get here. That's how we get where we are. Or is it 100 or something? It might be 100, whatever. Oh, it's 90. The base healing is 90. That's what it is. Okay. Yeah, either way, the point still stands. That, yeah, you are generally speaking, as time goes on, less incentivized to smite a jungle camp for health instead of smiting the enemy and fighting them, or smiting them for the slow or the damage reduction or whatever. And if you're aggressive, they can't heal as hard, so you can maybe kill them on the evade. So cool stuff. I think this is generally a positive. I think this is actually a good change for the game. Okay, great. Clash coming in, some bug fixes and QOL stuff. Okay, great. More skins coming in, pretty hype. And so we've had a pretty short video. Let's TLDR patch 11.20. This patch is not affecting worlds. This is very much solo queue focused. So we've got Amumu getting lower damage on Q max, which is mostly support focused, and a much larger mana cost on the Q as well, which should be a little bit support focused, but this will still nerf jungle Amumu some because they're all strict nerfs. Darius is getting pushed away from maxing W. 1/4 of players wrongly max W second on Darius. You should always max E second. There's even more reason to do it now because there's even fewer rank up incentives on W. Should be a pretty meaningful buff because 2 seconds on a cooldown is pretty nice. Elise is getting 21 base health and 0.65 armor growth. A little bit more durable in the early game, much more durable in the late game. Overall, pretty meaningful. To the tune of 1 to 2%, not 2%, about 1% win rate. Decent buff here, solid. Hecarim is getting 4 seconds off the W until level 14, and 30 extra healing against minions and monsters on the W. This has a chance of buffing lane Hecarim quite a lot, because getting 120 health per wave is a lot of health per wave. That is quite meaningful. And then meanwhile, the 4 seconds off the cooldown is going to be nice for jungle clear. You're going to be healthier. You're going to kill camps faster. And, there is a chance because your builds are going to have some haste in them. And the cooldown boots, by the way, are the best boots on Hecarim, for example. And, Death Stance, not a terrible option either. That, okay, well, you're going to have some cooldown, maybe get a second W off, and that could be meaningful as well. Next up is Irelia. Irelia is getting a lower bonus AD ratio on max stack passive, so a bit less late game damage. Okay, great. Jarvan is going to be doing less damage overall with the passive damage revert back to 8%. Okay, great. That's going to hurt his jungle clear pretty meaningfully. So it should actually lower jungle Jarvan by a tier, but he'll still be pretty good. Next up is Shen, losing 10 flat damage on the shield. The ratio is the same. Again, it's 10 flat at all ranks, so a much bigger nerf to his landing phase. Pretty meaningful. Singed is losing 0 to 20 damage flat on his fling, as well as 0.15 on the AP ratio. There is still a % health damage ratio on fling. The damage is not complete trash, but it's not terribly high, unless you're actually flinging real tanks with a lot of health. Your damage on Ashe or something is not really that meaningful. Keep in mind, Singed also gets free ability power with his R on. I did not do a data table for that, so we're not going to talk about it too much, but he does anytime his R is on, just like the fling does more damage, by the way. So there is kind of a lot of AP ratio, sort of total ability power on Singed, kind of worth noting there. yeah, it's a fairly meaningful nerf, but his Q ratio is still incredibly high, and so, you know, we still have that going on. Next up is Taliyah. Taliyah has a very little bit less damage to monsters. It is down 4.8%, both in the base damage and the ability power ratio. In the early game, this is going to mean occasionally it takes you 1 extra auto attack to kill a jungle camp, maybe 2 if it required several recasts, which will slow down her jungle clear by 3-5 seconds, maybe at the highest, which 5 seconds is actually pretty meaningful in jungle clear. So we'll see how much that actually matters. But it's only monster damage, it's not anything else, not PvP, not minions, not anything else. So it's a jungle-focused nerf. Udyr is getting 10 to 30 and eventually 35 at level 16 more damage on the Phoenix R, on the cone damage. Pretty meaningful. AP ratio is still reasonably high, though I think still not high enough for Udyr to want to build AP in any realistic situations. But hey, Phoenix Udyr back in the menu. Imperial Mandate up 25% on the initial damage, up 7% on the total damage if your teammate actually triggers the detonation. In general, again, I talked about it in the non-TLDR, but Nami is a big Imperial Mandate user. Know that you no longer steal the damage with it. That is a really big deal. You no longer steal the kill. The damage is attributed to the, you know, the Sivir or the TF or whatever, and not you. So kills go on the right targets. You accelerate the right champions, golden comes, all good things. Buffs to pretty big buffs to Mandate users. Pretty much no one's really building Mandate, so good to see that happening. Jungle changes. Smite heals for quite a bit less. We can go ahead and show the data table because it's right here. Pretty substantially less healing, right? We're looking at 30 less health per Smite. In the early game, keep in mind we're smiting either 1 or 2 in the early game, and they're smiting at around level 3 for our normal clear. Like these are kind of like these levels where our first 2 smites are happening. The next smite's going to be around, you know, one of these levels, but basically, you know, it's minus 30 to minus 40 for our smites in the early game, and we're using 2 of them, right? So we're losing on average 70. There we go. That's not hard. We're losing on average 70 health on our jungle clear. 70 health. So the question is, can we make that back up by the Gromp having 4 less base AD and the Krug having 4 less base AD? 70? Are we getting auto attacked 20 times by these champs? By these camps? No, probably not. Actually, is my math even accurate here? 5%, right? 5% of 500 is 25? Yeah, 25. If we're like 600, it's 30. Yeah, this is about right. We're still about accurate here. I don't think I'm doing anything really stupid, so yeah, okay. It's about accurate, right? We're losing 10% of our level 3-ish max health, which is 600 to 700. Yeah, okay, so the math is accurate over 2 smites. Are we getting this much damage back? I'm not sure. This feels... I guess I'm not really counting how many autos Gromp is sending at me, so I'm not 100% certain. And same for Big Krug, because I'm often smiting the Big Krug, and I'm often smiting the actual Gromp, but maybe it's close, right? It's maybe slightly down. But, you know, not hugely. It's not going to be a really big deal. There's a lot of champions who, honestly, they don't even use their potions on the clear anyway. There are some champs who do, and that can be meaningful, but there's some champs where it doesn't really matter. And, yeah, it's not going to be a huge change. Again, the primary reason this change is happening is in mid to late game fights that happen to be in the jungle, it is better to smite the raptors than to smite the champion you're fighting. And this is going to happen less frequently as a result of this change because the healing is significantly less in the late game. So that you're more likely to smite the Taliyah who's invading you and not the raptor to walk away. At the end of the day, pretty small change. That's the patch. Hope you enjoyed the rundown. Thanks for watching. And keep watching Worlds. Cloud9's doing well so far. Seems good. See ya. Bye-bye.